Good morning and welcome back to the Equalities and Human Rights Committee, and we will continue on with our agenda item 2 this morning, which is a continuation of our inquiry on school bullying and prejudice-based bullying in schools. Can I welcome to committee this morning our new panel. We are missing a panel member, but we hopefully will be tracking that person down, and they'll join us imminently. But to get us kicked off this morning, can I make some introductions and welcome to committee this morning Anthony Horan, who is the Director of the Catholic Parliamentary Office of the Catholic Bishops' Conference in Scotland. Welcome, Anthony. Reverend Dr Richard Fraser, who's the convener of the Church and Society Council of the Church of Scotland. Welcome. Samina Dean, who is a youth worker with Scotland Against Criminalising Communities. Welcome, Samina. Brittany Ritell, who is a youth worker and representative for the Scottish Council of Jewish Communities. And Charlie Lynch, who is the Secretary of the Secular, try and say that with the Secretary of the Scottish Secular Society. Thank you very much for coming along this morning. We're hoping that Imam will be joining us quite soon, but we'll continue on because we are very, very tight for time and we want to hear from you this morning. We've got some written evidence from you all, and thank you so much for that. It always helps us to inform our deliberations and the questions that we want to ask. But I think what I'll do to kick off with is to give each one of you a couple of minutes to explain who you are, what you do, and where you think it's relevant to the work that you do, to the inquiry that we're undertaking. Anthony, I wonder if we just start with you because you're right facing me. So.
Yeah, as the convener said, thank you, convener. I'm Anthony Horan, Director of the Catholic Parliamentary Office of the Catholic Bishops' Conference of Scotland. And first of all, I'd just like to say that the Bishops' Conference of Scotland is pleased to participate in this, with this committee in this inquiry, and to contribute to the discussions around tackling prejudice-based bullying in schools and indeed beyond. Now, my job as a Director of the Catholic Parliamentary Office is essentially to engage with Parliament and with government, so we felt that that would be appropriate for me to attend here today, given that that's my role. I also have an overview of the Catholic Church and the various agencies of the Church, which includes the Scottish Catholic Education Service, and you've already heard from Barbara Cooper, the Director of the Scottish Catholic Education Service, at a evidence session in January. So I have that sort of overview of the Church and all the various agencies, and I'm responsible for engaging with Parliament, so it was felt that it would be fitting for me to attend today. And as I say, we're very keen to assist the committee in whatever way we can, and to, of course, try to eradicate and to tackle bullying in all its forms.
Okay, thanks very much. Reverend Fraser.
Yes, I'm Richard Fraser. I'm a Parish Minister of the Church of Scotland, just up the road at Greyfriars Kirk, and I'm also convener of the Church and Society Council of the Church of Scotland. We're very glad to be part of this. I think that one of the commitments that we want to make as a church is that we're very committed to human flourishing and to enabling young people to reach their best. And I think one of the things I would say personally is that, you know, any young person that comes into contact with the church, I would hate to think that we would find a way of making them feel diminished or in any way intimidated by that experience. And part of our role as Church and Society Council is to help the Church in its relationship with schools, in its relationship with education, to find ways in which we can be in the vanguard of promoting human flourishing, enabling people to reach their best and not feel that in any sense their encounter with a faith community, and in our case the Church of Scotland, should in any way make them feel worse about themselves. I think one of the observations I would make just at this stage is that, having read some of the evidence that's come in from other groups, it's quite clear that there's a common thread about an issue about young people being singled out because they fit into a category, and that category might be a faith community or it might be a non-faith community, and feeling in some way that they're put on the spot because of that. And I think that's an issue, that's a common thread that runs through a lot of the submissions that I find is really an intriguing one there. And I suppose one of the areas that I think we're interested in doing is being in the vanguard of trying to promote tolerance, pluralism, respectful dialogue, and finding ways in which we can reshape the contribution that the church makes to that throughout Scotland.
Yep, thank you very much. Samina.
Hi, I'm Samina Dean, and I'm here due to a written submission by Scotland Against Criminalising Communities, who have endorsed and supported my survey on Islamophobia in Edinburgh schools, which is due to my own children experiencing Islamophobia. I wanted to know how widespread this was, so I spoke with 100 Muslim children who go to Edinburgh schools, and I wanted their experiences on Islamophobia.
Thank you, Samina. Brittany.
I'm Brittany Ritell, and I am the youth worker for the Jewish community of Scotland. I predominantly work in Glasgow because that's where the largest concentration of Jews are. I have done some work in Edinburgh as well. A lot of what I do is going into schools and running Jewish assemblies or lunch clubs. Sometimes these are also attended by non-Jewish students, so it is a chance to act as an ambassador for Judaism as well. I also work outside of the schools, so I work with youth movements, largely supporting ones that already exist. There's a large number of Jewish youth movements in the UK, and a few of them make it up to Scotland as well. So I do work with the youth in and out of school.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Convener. My name is Charlie Lynch. I'm Secretary of the Scottish Secular Society. The other members of the panel may, I imagine, will know that secularism is rather old, but our society is rather new. I would like to thank the Convener and your colleagues for being willing to listen to the voices and evidence of those of non-faith as well as those from a faith background. And I look forward to contributing to discussions.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to some opening questions, and I know, Jeremy, you were wanted to come in with some questions. You were listening there. So.
I was listening there, yes. Yeah. Well, good morning, and thank you all very much for coming along. I think it's been helpful to have some evidence from both the Church of Scotland and from the Catholic Church, and sadly also from the submission in regard to kind of faith bullying. We've talked a lot in the last number of weeks about different categories, and I think we've heard that people who feel like they're in a minority, whatever that minority is, within a school often feel that they are victimised for that belief. And we've seen, you've given examples of people from different faith communities who feel that they have been bullied because of either a belief or a faith or an understanding. And I suppose the question which I asked the previous group would be, what do you think can be done by Scottish Government to help the faith communities feel that they have as much protection as gender and sexuality and all the other protected areas? Because perhaps it's the one that's sometimes forgotten about in regard to the five. I don't know whether you want to go along the line or who wants to go first, but it's a general question.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I think the problem that we have, and it was alluded to at the first session, is there's this culture of, it's almost like this culture of disquiet, this culture of fear of being open about, in this case, you're being open about your faith. Of course, there's other protected characteristics and other characteristics that people have that they might feel uncomfortable about speaking openly about, and of course, I know the committee's taking evidence on that. But in this case, where I think there's a lot of people feel just very, very fearful about just being open about their faith. It's not that they're trying to impose their views on anyone, just actually speaking openly about it. And some of the evidence that I've got from some of the young people in schools in terms of anti-Catholic bullying, it's quite disappointing to see that they can't even just simply admit that or be open that they have a Catholic faith and they hold certain values. So I just think there's a real culture of fear. And I think that it's exacerbated, and again, this was mentioned in the first session, exacerbated by the existence of social media, which has become a platform for people to put forward hateful views and to discriminate and so on and so forth. And that's something that I think we need to deal with. We really, really need to look at that culture that is existing because of the existence of social media. But what it's further exacerbated by, and I think this is really important, is the behaviour of adults on social media. If adults can't behave, and I'm talking about professional people as well, and you see some of the things that some people say to one another on social media, if adults can't behave, how on earth can we expect our children to behave? So I just think that there's just this deep culture of fear, and I think it's very, very difficult for anyone to come up with the right answer as to how to deal with it. What certainly we in the church have been doing, we do it at a national level and a local level, is that we work with other church groups, other Christian denominations, other faith groups, in order to try and build up a culture of respect and tolerance among faith communities. And even beyond that, I know that in my own parish that we have a youth group which reaches out to all children across the community. We recently had a welcoming day for refugees who'd recently come into the community from Syria. These kind of things are very, very important at that local level, and I think we need to keep encouraging them. And I think also we shouldn't underestimate the amount of that kind of thing that's going on just now in our society and in our communities, and it's useful to bear that in mind. But from a national perspective, I don't think there's any easy answer, but I think that what we need to try and do is we need to tackle this culture of fear which exists, as I say, because people can't even just simply be open about who they are and what values they stand for, and that's a real concern, especially for young people.
Yeah, Reverend Fraser.
Okay, thank you. Yes, thank you for that question as well, Jeremy. There's something I think that's really important that was echoed in the last consultation earlier this morning, that is an issue about what might be described as religious and secular literacy amongst those who are educating our young people. If a teacher will say, as we heard this morning, well, that's just, boys will be boys. You've just got to put up with that and put on a pair of tights rather than just wearing shorts in the gym. That's a kind of outrage, isn't it? I mean, it's a kind of extraordinary lack of awareness and sensitivity on the part of those that we charge with the responsibility of nurturing our young people. And I think in the same way, sometimes what we've seen in the evidence is that young people, whether they're secular, whether they're from any kind of faith community, can sometimes feel that they're singled out, can sometimes feel that they're asked to be an expert in a subject that they really know very little about, or just because they happen to be born into that community. Doesn't mean to say that they're necessarily literate about the aspects of that things, about that faith community or that secular community. So I think the issue of religious literacy is really important. But one of the other religious and secular literacy, I think people need to be taught that it is a legitimate thing in a pluralist, multicultural society to learn about how the paths that people follow, the different paths that people follow. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that we need to learn that in the church, in the churches and in faith communities, that, you know, that we have to learn to live alongside each other. So I think one of the other aspects that I think is also important for us to do is to recognize our histories, recognize the way in which the journey that we've taken as a society from one place, what Scotland was like in, say, the 16th century at the time of the Reformation, to what it's like today as a multicultural, multi-faith, multicultural, pluralist society. And that means that within faith communities we need, and especially within the Church of Scotland that has sometimes exercised quite a lot of power, quite a lot of influence in society, we have to learn a different way of being present, which is less about exercising power and control and more about exercising presence and support. And that's a lesson I think we in the Church of Scotland need to learn. But I think it's a lesson that will be of benefit to the whole of society if we can learn that.
See you nodding away, Samina.
Yes, I mean, I agree with the fact that we need more support, definitely, and I think that's something that young children, they don't have that outlet, they don't have that support system in place in schools, unfortunately. But to your question, I would like to say, in terms of Muslim children, it's very difficult for us to hide our physical characteristics, whether it be wearing the headscarf, whether it be having a beard, or even the start of growing a beard, or even now that we're in Ramadan, a lot of the Muslim children will be fasting, so they won't be in the lunch hall or in the canteen, or they'll be questioned, oh, why are you not having lunch today? So there's these visible characteristics as a Muslim that you're going to know that okay, this person is a Muslim. So you can't even hide your faith because it's visible. And I think due to my study where I spoke with 100 Muslim children, one thing that struck me was the fact that 67 of them wouldn't even tell a teacher that they were experiencing Islamophobic comments or Islamophobic physical abuse. And the reasons for that was because they felt that the teachers didn't have a proper understanding about their religion, about Islam. And because the teachers didn't have that understanding, they couldn't really understand how that child felt, how that Muslim child felt, and because they couldn't understand the seriousness, the fact that it was an attack on their identity, and because that teacher couldn't understand that they wouldn't help or they wouldn't do anything about it. And the sad thing about my report is that, which was worrying, is that the children who did actually report to school teachers, you know, a lot of the schools did not even respond. They didn't take any action. And the schools that did, the children themselves were not even happy with the outcome. So they were left there, it felt like injustice had been done. They've been attacked due to their faith, due to their identity, and it made them feel really, really scared. Actually, 21 of the 100 children that I spoke with said that they feared, and I used the specific word feared, they feared going to school on the basis that they were just a Muslim. And the reasons that they gave, and I quote, is because they were scared of abuse and getting attacked. Because what happens on the news, what people might think of me because I wear hijab. And I was scared if I might get attacked. So this was quite prominent in how the Muslim children were feeling. And just to give you an idea, over 55% of them have encountered verbal Islamophobia, and over 40% of them physical Islamophobia, where they're having their hijabs ripped off, they're being punched, they're being kicked, they're being called a terrorist, they're being called, you know, suicide squad. They're being asked if they have bombs and guns under their hijab, and this is like and I don't think this is, even though my study was based in Edinburgh, I actually think that this is happening throughout of Scotland, actually throughout the UK, looking at other studies.
Yeah, thanks, Samina. It almost tells the truth about all of the evidence that we've heard about, and the numbers are pretty similar. You know, 59%, 65%, 67% of young people fear reporting. When they do report, they fear it will get worse. When it is reported, they don't get the response that should be the right response. And when you heard from the Kirkcaldy High School this morning, the way they respond, that's a gold standard, and we would hope that we promote that. But it is pretty clear that the systems, so whatever the discrimination is across any protected, it seems that the systems is where we're being let down. I don't know if Brittany, you would give us some insight into, from your perspective, and you'll know the Scottish Government made a statement on Tuesday on hate crime. You'll all know that there was a specific recommendation in that about accepting the Holocaust Trust definition of anti-Semitism, and whether you have some truth to say to that.
I'm not sure if I have anything specific to say about that announcement, although I do think it is very good that there is a definition of anti-Semitism. I think that probably will help combat anti-Semitism. A lot of times it's hard to define exactly what is bad enough to be dealt with. So having a very concrete, clear definition will go a long way.
It's that literacy issue that Reverend Fraser spoke about.
I actually wrote down that phrasing because I really liked that idea of religious and secular literacy. That is something in the reports I submitted that was kind of a common theme in suggestions, that in a lot of communities, there will be people that have never met a Jewish person in their life. So how are they supposed to get a clear understanding of what Judaism is? And if you're a religious education teacher, how are you supposed to teach about that when you've probably never actually met someone who represents that faith? So having the chance to educate teachers is one thing, but going at it from the other end is also important. We've acknowledged a lot of students won't feel comfortable speaking to the adults that can help them. They don't think that a report will do anything. So in the last session, an important word that came up was bystander. When I talked with some P7 students yesterday, none of them knew what a bystander was. In working on creating a Holocaust education curriculum for S5 and S6 students, my colleague said he didn't think that S5 and S6 students would know what a bystander was. I think if we can start to change that culture, that will be important too. If students don't feel comfortable going to adults, the other approach we can take is to empower them to have a positive impact. I think if we approach it from both ends, that'll have the most effect. But bystander training is probably one of the most important things you can do. That way the people who are being targeted know how to handle it and their friends know how to handle it. It creates a support system from their peers.
Charlie, your perspective.
Could you repeat the question, please, convener?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it was to look at, I mean, we're getting clear evidence across the board that groups, whether it's sexuality, whether it's religion, whether it's gender, the five ones, minority groups feel that they are being excluded and don't feel that they're able to report that to the appropriate things. And my question really was, I appreciate there is no magic wand, but what is one step towards helping that, if that makes sense?
Okay. Well, as you will have read, the gist of our submission is that we're obviously very happy with religious observance as it's currently managed in non-denominational schools. We have started to compile evidence from pupils and from their parents who are atheists who have had all kinds of problems with religious observance. Obviously, since this has been established, there is a right to opt out. We are very concerned that frequently people aren't told about this properly. Schools try to discourage it in their governance because it is difficult for all kinds of reasons. But this creates a situation of difficulty of conscience for those who are atheists, and even those, I would say, those from minority faiths. What could be done would be to make a better system in some way. We have in the past advocated opting in rather than opting out. Perhaps there could be changes to the culture of schools to make them more inclusive of minority faiths and people of no faith, you think? We're also aware that there is a lot of variance across the country. Some of the more alarming evidence in our submission, I should add, came from the Western Isles. So there are clear variations and problems.
Okay, that's your question, Jeremy.
Thank you.
Mary.
Convener, I would like to kind of follow on the question that Jeremy posed with Charlie, because I'm quite struck that guidelines are widely ignored when pupils want to remove themselves from religious education, and pupils feel intimidated, and organisations that on the face of it, are there to encourage inclusion and encourage interaction, actually have a religious base. And I appreciate you say that we have to stick more closely to what we're being told, but how can we actually ensure that pupils feel confident and parents feel confident by going to a school and saying, I don't want my child taking part in any form of religious education?
I see. That's a very interesting and important series of points. Most obviously, Mary, what's coming up here is that children don't themselves have the right to opt out of things. And I'm aware that the Humanist Society is pursuing legal action at the moment about this, about what age that takes place at. I'm aware that educational psychologists have tests and means for ascertaining at what point children can make these kind of decisions. And we would like that to be investigated in various ways so people don't feel that they are made to take part in things which they cannot in all conscience agree with. As for parenting and for parents, we would like schools to display clearly in their handbooks that opting out is an option. We would like them to have proper and meaningful alternative arrangements for children who are opted out, so that they are not made to feel othered, they are not made to feel different, they're not made to sit alone in a corridor, for example. This is the kind of thing that we hear about. And genuinely, this whole series of problems is approached in a more compassionate and understanding fashion.
And I suppose you have to find a balance between the rise in, for example, Islamophobia, the very little understanding there is about Judaism. So you have to find a way to balance. Is religious education the only way that we can inform and educate pupils in schools about other religions so that we can break down the barriers and people have more understanding? And is that the argument that you're given? Or do you think there's another way we can inform people about different faiths to break down those levels of discrimination?
Well, firstly, what we have almost entirely talked about here is religious observance. The Scottish Secular Society is very pro-religious and moral education, and we actually think there should be more. We would like there to be more of a philosophical element to it, but in general, we're very for it. Religious observance, which is kind of activities such as the saying of prayers in a communal setting, the singing of hymns and so on, that is a different set of problems.
So where it's based on one particular faith?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. I don't know, Samina, I don't know if you're able to comment. Do you think there has been a significant increase in the intimidation and the bullying and the harassment that young Muslim children are experiencing, given the culture that we currently exist in? Have you seen a dramatic rise in it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even I could say, like, back in 2013, you know, the general theme of being called a terrorist and a bomber was reported by 1,400 children to Childline. That was back in 2013. We're now in 2017, and we're still facing the same thing, but even more. You know, the fact that it's come to the level where, you know, young Muslim girls are having their hijab pulled off their head in school. You know, and children, I'm a youth worker in profession, and when I was speaking to these 100 children, there was 2 children in primary school who, if they came to my youth group, I would be filling in the well-being forms right now because of the Islamophobic abuse that they're facing right now. And they're suffering in silence. And it came to a point where I actually, having a conversation with the community inspector, asked for a link officer to go into one particular school just because of the well-being of this primary school boy. So the level, I mean, you can, the testimonies actually show that some levels of these are criminal offences of what's been happening to these Muslim children.
And is there any proper recording done when incidents are reported?
When I asked, again, the children's testimonies, the only recorded the recorded thing as a racial incident happened, and that was because of what happened to my daughter who's in primary school, and it was because when I spoke to the head teacher, I told them I was conducting this survey, and the responses that I've had from other schools has been absolutely like minimal, and I'm really annoyed that it's not been taken seriously. Then he did turn around and say, I'm actually going to record this as a racist incident. But what's been happening is that the teachers who have taken action, for example, the Muslim child would get a sorry. Now, for me, yes, the teacher has acted upon by going to speak to that child. The victim has received a sorry, but the Muslim child themselves felt there was an injustice done. They felt sorry was not enough because of the abuse that they had to face. It was like, sorry is not enough, and they left. Even though the teacher had taken an action and that child got sorry, it just wasn't enough. So there was a sense that the children came back feeling like they had no closure, they had no support, they felt like it wasn't taken seriously. And what I found throughout this whole report is that, and which I think is going to happen more and more, is that the 33% who said they were going to tell teachers is going to become 0%, because the 67% who said they wouldn't, and they give me valid reasons why they wouldn't, because they have done it before and nothing got done, it's going to, you know, it's going to filter down to the 33% that said, yeah, we were going to do it, because they know nothing's going to be done. And I think teachers in schools and, you know, authorities, they need to recognise a racist, Islamophobic incident, a comment, and until that recognition doesn't happen, I don't think Islamophobia, I think it's going to get worse.
Okay. And just one more brief question. Anthony, I wonder, I'm not sure, were you present for the earlier session?
Was for the second half of it,
right, okay.
Yes.
Because, and thank you for the submission that we've received this morning, and I know that you're aware that Barbara Cooper has been here before and has given us evidence. And while I appreciate that this session is more based on faith-based bullying, I can't let the opportunity go by without doing almost a kind of compare and contrast with the evidence that you gave us, which says that Catholic schools adhere to the same anti-bullying policies as their non-denominational counterparts. As Catholics, we believe in the inherent dignity of each and every human being, and Catholic schools are committed to ensuring that all protected characteristics under the Equality Act share policies aimed at tackling bullying. And the evidence that we heard this morning was that Catholic schools sweep everything under the carpet. There are no equality groups, no LGBTI groups, and because they are faith-based schools and the faith does not believe in sex before marriage, does not support gay marriage, we just don't talk about it. And I'd be interested in your comments on that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I heard that, and obviously I can't sort of comment on individual cases, but I did hear that comment and some of the other things that were said in relation to Catholic schools specifically. And we do have a job to do in terms of taking on board those concerns that the young people have and bad experiences that they might have had in Catholic schools. So undoubtedly we need to take that on board. And I think Barbara at the session on the 26th of January did say that she would do that and that she would take that forward. And what we've done, in fact, since then is on the 18th of May we had a training session for secondary school teachers, and around 50 of them attended, and there'll be another session at the end of the year for head teachers. And really what we were looking at was all of the protected characteristics under the Equality Act 2010 to try and make sure that they're aware of their responsibility under the Equality Act generally, and also in relation to those protected characteristics specifically. And that's not leaving any of the protected characteristics out, it's covering all of them. And also we covered the public sector equality duty as well, which is important. We also looked at Respect Me and the very useful resource that is online to help equip, and all of this was really done just to help equip teachers to make sure they were aware of any incidences of bullying, and you know, it's not just one or two characteristics, it's across a whole range of characteristics, and to try and put processes in place in order to deal with that. Now, this is an ongoing process. Of course, we already have anti-bullying procedures in place, and we'd like to think that they're fairly robust, but of course, if we continue to get instances where young people are telling us that they've had a bad experience, then of course we need to continue to review that. And I think, Mary, you had touched on a very important point earlier, which I completely agree with, is about recording and monitoring. That is something that we do need to get better at, I think, because if we're going to improve the school experience of our young people, whatever the protected characteristic they come under, we need to know where the issues are. And because if we record and monitor appropriately across the board, then we will know where the issues are, and we will know how then it will better inform us in terms of how we go forward and tackle that. Yeah,
and clearly the information we got this morning about Kirkcaldy High School and the ethos and the culture that they have developed in that school is clearly a model that we would love to see rolled out across all of Scotland, and they are welcoming and inclusive of everyone, regardless of their beliefs. And is that something that you think that the Catholic schools would be able to develop, a similar model to that?
Well, certainly, as Reverend Fraser had stated at the outset, similar to what he said, we in the Catholic community believe in the inherent dignity of every human being. Every human being is made in the image and likeness of God, so they have inherent worth and value, and there is no exceptions to that, and they have to be abundantly clear about that. Every child should feel included, and there should be no feelings of exclusion or feeling left out or whatever. And in terms of the Kirkcaldy example, I think there's always things that we can learn from. So if there's a way that we can improve the school experience of young people who might be feeling left out, discriminated against or whatever, then I think we should always give consideration to good examples out there that we can that might help us to improve our practice in future.
Yeah, because certainly evidence we've had at previous sessions from young people that have attended Catholic schools, there is a bit of work to be done in relation to sexual identity and sexual harassment and discrimination. And I'm pleased to hear that you say you're going to be doing a bit of work, so we look forward to you taking that forward.
Yeah,
Anthony, can I just pick up on that point as well? We've had some evidence from some young people who hold St Joseph's in Dumfries up as a really good example of a school. I don't know whether you know the details of that school in particular, but especially round about maybe sexual harassment, sexual assault and orientation for young people and how they have handled that. And we've only had some anecdotal evidence, so we've not had a chance to go and visit the school or whatever, but I just wondered whether you had any more detail on that and how that was taken forward, and whether it was a leadership thing with the school or a leadership thing with the whole structure.
I'm afraid, Convener, I can't elaborate on that, unfortunately.
That was a bit unfair.
But, no, it's all right, sorry. But I think one of the things, just going back to the question that Mary had raised as well, I think there's also a job to be done in terms of making sure people understand the Catholic faith and Catholic values, and I think that's something that most of the panel have spoken to in terms of their faith. And I think we do need to make sure that people do understand what the Catholic faith is and what it stands for, and of course, but that doesn't. That wouldn't compromise. We would never want that to compromise the safety and well-being of all of our children. Yeah. But I think it's an important point to remember.
How do you cope with where there's tensions in between where your faith sits and maybe where society is now? How do you cope with those tensions? Because that must be really difficult. And we've dealt a wee bit with intersectionality and how that affects young people growing up, because you're not just a part of one group or one characteristic. You generally got a number of them. How would you take forward, policy or procedure or learning that supports the young person that sits in the middle of that intersectionality, and the tension is maybe with the faith and with where they are as a person and an individual?
Well, first and foremost, as I said before, we believe in the inherent dignity of each and every human person who's made in the image and likeness of God, and that is something that no Catholic person or Christian should forget. I think we do need to make sure that point is emphasised. But also, we do appreciate that we have to look after our young people, and we know that there are, particularly in contemporary society, there are tensions with certain beliefs that the Catholic faith holds dear. But I just think that I don't think we can forget that the Church still believes that each and every person is of intrinsic worth and value. So that would just be the fundamental starting point. But of course, within that, we do need to cater for all people to make sure that no one's rights are infringed upon in an unnecessary way.
I suppose I would pose that same question to all the faith groups and none as well, Reverend Fraser.
I think it's a really interesting, in the light of what happened to the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party yesterday, it's a really interesting issue that you're raising here about, if you like, people's theological position and the position of the culture. Yeah. And I think one of the things that, we've in the Church of Scotland been wrestling with these issues for many years now. And I think one of the things that we've recognised is that we have this term which we use as a constrained difference, and that's the idea of trying to create an organisation because we believe in inclusion, because we believe that no one should feel excluded. How can we live with diversity within our organisation, within our church? Because we have LGBT people, LGBTI people who are members of the Church of Scotland. We have ministers who are in same-sex relationships, that kind of thing. So how do we deal with that? How do we live with that, knowing that some people are at different ends of a spectrum? And I think part of how we deal with that, or how we've tried to deal with that, is about taking an approach that involves openness to learning. Some years ago, there was a perspective about sexual identity that was pretty fixed in our society and within the understanding of the Church. And I think that people have maybe taken on board some of the evidence, taken on board some of the science, taken on board some of the kind of cultural shifts that have taken place in our society, and recognised that we're actually in a different place now in terms of our understanding of human sexuality and human identity than perhaps we were 50 years ago. And we've tried to inculcate that into our thinking. And that's really important. But just on the wider issue about, I wanted just to kind of endorse what Charlie was saying about the importance of literacy, the importance of understanding. I think that's absolutely fundamental. And I think one of the things that is really important that we're also trying to do in the Church of Scotland, through the work that we do in education, is to find ways in which we can frame the stuff that we do, both in terms of our contribution to religious and moral education and philosophical education, but also in terms of religious observance. Frame that in such a way that what we're not offering is a dominant position or a position of expectation of belief on people, but rather recognizing that we can learn from each other, that we can actually be enriched by learning more about Islam, by learning more about secularism, by learning more about Buddhism or about Judaism. And we should not be afraid of diversity. We need to be enriched by the diversity of our culture. So I think all these things are really important. But what I would say is that both in terms of our understanding of human identity and sexual identity, and in terms of our understanding of pluralism, we're on a journey. And what we've got to do, I think, is to put in place those measures and those policies that will support people in taking that journey towards tolerance, towards respect, and towards a deeper understanding of human identity.
Yeah, a number of the young people that we've spoken to in the course of this inquiry have suggested to us that a way forward in all of this is to have decent relationship and friendship. Yeah. Not so much training, but awareness raising, understanding. How do you build a relationship? How do you deal with rejection? How do you deal with conflict? And it seems to me that the wisdom of the young, I think, will be the common thread through our committee report, because they seem to know what needs to be the underpin and the foundation that allows, that flourishing that we all want for young people. And I suppose, what you're saying there about not having the dominant, the expectation and the dominant attitude to that is maybe the way to go. Sure. Now, where I think that will be very, very stark, because I think some of the evidence that we've heard over the past few months from especially organisations who support people who have been victims of racist incidents is that there's things coming back now that we thought we had got rid of many, many years ago. And I suppose for many minority, or different groups, that things go up and down as it goes. And I suppose, Samina, that brings me to you and the point that Reverend Fraser made is about how do you support young people who are facing the abuse that they are facing, but how do you then use those opportunities to educate other young people to have those healthy relationships and that attitude that it's about humankind and not about difference in that respect. One of the criticisms we've had about religious training in classrooms is that you can't just teach a child that this is how you observe Judaism, this is how you observe Christianity. You need to show the interconnections to that and the understanding of it. And it's how do we do that? Give me a magic pill that I can put into my report that tells the Scottish Government how to do that.
I wish there was a magic pill. It's a really difficult one because I think in terms of learning about each other's religions, it's like what you said. When I spoke with the 100 children, 57 of them felt really, happy and proud that Islam was being talked about during their school lessons because, that was their religion. But the others felt really uncomfortable and they felt worried because we know in today's climate that, Islam has been falsely linked with terrorism. And that is wherever you go, whether it be in the media or social media, wherever it's blatantly there. and this is what other young people are picking up, and due to that, these abuses are happening to Muslim children. When I spoke to them about in especially secondary school, in the curriculum, they talk about terrorism, they talk about the Francis burqa ban, they talk about Saudi Arabia, how the women can't drive, those kind of things that are related to Islam, although I wouldn't say terrorism is related to Islam. But when those things were talked about, especially terrorism, 65% of them felt really scared and worried during that lesson. And the reason why, because they felt as soon as they left that classroom door, as soon as they walked out that door, what was going to happen to them? What were the repercussions of sitting through that lesson? And a lot of them felt that during the lesson, everybody would just stare at them, so they would become the centre of attention. And that made them feel really worried and uncomfortable. And so I think we really need to go back and actually say, are the schools providing a safe haven for religious minorities, for religious people, when they're actually talking about these things, like the terrorist attacks that atrocious terrorist attacks that have happened. Over 46 out of the 100 were so scared of going to school the next day because of the repercussions of the backlash. So, we know that young children already face a lot of things as adolescence, exams, everything, but then the extra worry on top of that. And I think what was more worrying was, again, the physical characteristics of the girls who wear headscarves. They were they were really concerned because they're visibly noticeable that something was going to happen to them and things were going to be said to them. And they were right, that was the case. Is there a magic pill for that? I think there needs to be recognition, and I think it's not been recognised by teachers, it's not been recognised by head teachers, or it's definitely not been logged. And I think also, like people like yourselves, the Parliament, the Council, unions, teaching unions, the wider society, everybody needs to play a part in this, because like my daughters have had Islamophobic abuses at school, which has led to me doing this study, as a mum. And the repercussions, to pick up your daughter and she is crying and crying when she comes home because she's told that she belongs to ISIS. And she's like, but I have nothing to do with this. This has got nothing to do with me. And being born here, she sees herself as a Scottish person, just like everybody else. She's a Muslim, but she just doesn't understand why everybody is singling her out. And the psychological effects that this is having on Muslim children is astounding. I came across Muslim children who wanted to change their name. So we had boys who wanted to change their name. They have the brown appearance, but they could be a different, they could be Indian or Sikh or something else. But the fact they had a Muslim name, that meant that they were Muslim, so that meant that they were a target. I had girls who were in S1 who have made their own decision that they want to wear the headscarf when they're in S3. But because they're witnessing what's happening to a girl who's already wearing the headscarf, how she's being isolated, how she's not, nobody really wants to be friends with her because she wears that headscarf, they're worrying that in 2 years' time, is that that's going to happen to me? And it's these kind of worries and concerns, the psychological pressures that these Muslim children are facing needs to be addressed, and there needs to be an outlet. There needs to be a support, like you said, a support system, and we don't have one in place at all.
Okay. Brittany and Charlie, I don't know if you want to add to that.
I will mirror some of what Samina said with the Jewish students, that when there's a topic that comes up in classes that is Jewishly related, they do feel kind of singled out or stared at by their peers. So obviously, if you're talking about World War II and the Holocaust, that's a time when students will kind of feel like they're being singled out, or sometimes they actually are, by teachers wanting to hear the perspective from the Jewish kid in class. Which is kind of a problematic attempt, right? Like, it is great to try and hear the voices of other people, but that's not really the right way to be doing it. Or when I run a lunch club, there are usually slides in the school, and sometimes a teacher will say, okay, you and you, make sure you go, because you're the Jewish students. And it's not really the greatest way to try and get students engaged, to single them out like that. It is the hardest thing when you're at that age group, to be perceived as different. There is one thing I want to highlight as a good practice, though, in terms of religious education. One of the schools I go to, they have actually weekly religious assemblies, and students can go to whichever one they'd like. But every now and then they also do an interfaith assembly. So there will be a representative of Christianity, a representative of Islam, and myself going as the Jewish representative. We're given a topic to speak on. So the first one we did was the path to God. And each one of us spoke about our religion's perspective on that topic, one after another. It's actually a great model because the students get to see very rapidly the religions have a lot in common. We do have our differences, but there is so much in common. So that's going back to the idea of focusing on humankind, not difference. And I find that to be a great model. Additionally, when it comes to certain holidays, so there's generally a Christmas and an Easter assembly. At that same school, when they have that big assembly, there's a second one that is a joint Jewish-Muslim assembly. So the majority of students go to the Christian one, but the rest have another option. And again, we're doing something where we're talking about the similarities between our religions and kind of connecting those. And I do like that a lot as a model. It's not the be-all and end-all fix, but I do think that's something that could be adapted elsewhere.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Charlie, where do you fit into all of this, Charlie?
Yeah, where does no religion fit into this model? That is the problem, I think.
If there's time, they can have as many representatives as they need. They also do assemblies that'll be just based on one faith. So they've also had Buddhist and Sikh and other people come in. So if there are representatives, I'm sure that school would love to have more.
Yeah. How might we cope with this type of diversity and catering for it in more rural areas of the country, or perhaps resources are more stretched, there are not personnel on hand for this kind of diversity? How do we come up with a model that is flexible enough to allow this in different types of scenarios and scales?
Oh, I would say that's a challenge for everyone. Again, you know, my job, I'm concentrated between Glasgow and Edinburgh. There's so many areas that one person can only do so much. I know my organization that I'm representing today created resources that are approved by the people they're representing, right? So you get a say in what's being presented. Again, that requires some degree of funding and support and things like that for your organization, but definitely getting a chance to create your own resources that you can disseminate is one way. But yeah, the human piece, there's only so many of each, group that can go do the work.
The normal process as committee is to come through the chair, but I'm actually really enjoying this bit of interplay that's going on because it's the point, really. It's the point that if we talk to each other and we understand each other, then we can make a difference. So I'm really enjoying that there. We are almost out of time again, which is really quite worrying. Gail, I know that you wanted to come in with a quick, and Mary wanted to come back in. Gail.
I'll just make a quick point. I've just returned from Bosnia. We spent a couple of nights in Sarajevo, and we went up to the Srebrenica Memorial. And the Remembrance Srebrenica Scotland, which is led by Lorna Hood, Reverend Lorna Hood, have just produced an educational pack, which they're putting around schools. And I think it's very important in the sense that when I was over there, we got well, obviously we chatted to loads of different people, and in history you get taught about various things around the world. I mean, obviously the Holocaust is a huge example of that genocide that was, horrific, but also the Srebrenica genocide. Bosnian Muslims killed over 8,000 men and boys within 5 days. It was absolutely, I can't even go into it because it's still so fresh. It's really upsetting. And I just wondered if that's the sort of thing for, Scottish Government to be supporting these outside organisations that have these educational packs that can do that. And I also, wanted to touch on what, you've all said, but Charlie brought up about teaching children about the different religions and none, and that it's okay not to have a religion as well, and ethics and morals, as an aside to all that too. You don't need to be religious to be a good person. And I think that there is a message that we can take away from history as well about just all about being humans and respecting each other and trying to stamp out hate and prejudice in society everywhere that we see it. And I think that that's a responsibility on all of us. So, just really a comment.
A statement. Mary.
Can I comment as well? Because I suppose if we take on board the pressures that are on the curriculum, the pressures that are on teachers, and in order to really develop an understanding of, as Gail said, all faiths and no faiths, because we have to teach it in every single school. It can't just be in one school we concentrate on another faith. Every single school has to teach about every faith and no faith. And how do we give that the importance that it needs to have within the curriculum? Because it can't be once every 3 weeks someone comes in and talks to us for 10 minutes. And it can't be something that's outside the normal 9 to 4 school day, because then it would become an optional thing and you wouldn't get the buy-in of the staff and the pupils. So it needs to be, in my view, part of the main curriculum, but we need to ensure it's given the importance. And it can't be, I don't think, and I'll pick the Catholic schools, and I'm not picking on them for any particular reason in this instance, but does a Catholic teacher know enough about the Muslim faith and the Jewish faith and the Church of Scotland and no faith to stand up in front of a school and say, this is what these people believe and this is why they believe it and this is why we should support them, in the same way a school from the Christian faith couldn't do it? I can pose the question, but I don't expect you all to answer.
She's never gave you any easy ones at all,
Sorry. Sorry.
Reverend Fraser, you want to come in?
A couple of things there. One is, we talk from the Christian faith about, and Anthony's talked about this, about the inherent dignity of every human person made in the image of God, But what we share is humanity. And when we encounter the human in another person, regardless of their faith or none, then we see something that we can identify with. And so one of the things I think is really important for us to think about as a society is that we can't leave this down entirely to schools to deal with this issue. One of the things that we do in the parish just up the road where I'm minister is we've provided space for an organisation called Amina, which is a Muslim women's support group. We also have a lunch club that meets in one of our premises for elderly people in the Islamic community. And it's about friendship, and it's about relationships. And I think that there needs to be more resource. I mean, I know, for example, the Edinburgh Interfaith Association struggles financially to keep going, but what fantastic, what urgent and important work it's doing. And it does seem to me that it's a tragedy in a way that these kind of organisations that are about building relationships, building understanding, building friendship, are kind of withering because they don't get the kind of support that they need. In the times that we're talking about, I mean, those stories just make your heart break, And we need to be building those opportunities for people to learn from each other and to build those friendships that will make for a peaceable society and a peaceable world. That's absolutely crucial.
Yep.
Do you think government should take a more proactive role in promoting organisations like interfaith groups?
Yes.
And support them in a more open manner?
I do, absolutely.
Jeremy, you wanted to be a very quick supplementary? We're just about...
Well, I think it's probably going to be close to a statement because I think we are almost out of time. I think I found this really interesting debate, and I think the issue I'm not quite sure how we do is I think it maybe picks up Mary's point and maybe also others, is that there's now a lack of ignorance of what does a conservative Muslim believe, what does a conservative Orthodox Jew believe. Because we live in now such a secular society, the concept of what does even an evangelical Christian believe today is so manipulated by the media, or what does a traditional Catholic believe. And I suppose the question is, taking Mary's point, is how does a primary school teacher in Stockbridge Primary today represent that? And I think that is something we need to have a bigger discussion with the Education Committee on, with Scottish Government on, in that whether you're an Orthodox Jew, you're a traditional Catholic, whatever, because most people no longer go to church, have no connection with the faith communities on a regular basis, we've lost that. And it goes back to your issue of literacy. And I suppose I would be interested, maybe in a written statement at some point from you all, in is how do we get that literacy back into it, so it doesn't just work in the cities, but also works in rural Scotland and wherever. So it's more statements, sorry, Camilla.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, I think we've covered all of the ground I think we wanted to cover with you this morning. The upshot of all of this is the consequences on young people if we don't deal with this. And that's really where the thrust of our report will go, is about the consequences and how can we prevent those consequences becoming unhealthy. And that's the main point of all of this, I think. So can I thank you so much for your contributions this morning. They have been incredibly enlightening. They've given us another perspective to the whole dynamic that has helped us understand it more. We are in the process of compiling this report. We have the Cabinet Secretary with us next week, which will be the last evidence session on this, and we hope to have the report published quite soon after that. But as you can imagine, there is a lot of information in there, and I'm sure some very pointed recommendations, but we'll go through that. But again, just to thank you all for your participation at committee this morning, your written evidence. And in the next week, if there's anything you think we should have know about, please could you let us know, because making those links will be very helpful for us as well, and all the work going forward over the next few years. But I really appreciate your work. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm now going to suspend committee to go into private for quick discussion. Thanks.